the hope researchers are showing that hopeful people are happier, they're healthier, they live longer, they have stronger friendships, they are more creative thinkers, problem solvers, less depression. I mean, like
Yeah.
everybody wants to be more hopeful with those kinds of benefits. One of the researchers I spoke to said to me, you can fail to reach a goal, but you can't fail at hope.
Welcome to Journey of the Art, where we discuss the artist, unravel the art, and explore the road between. Hi, and welcome to Journey of the Art. Today I'm joined by Andrea Curtis to discuss her latest work, The Story and Science of Hope. Illustrated by Ana Suarez and backed by research, this middle grade book explores the intricacies and forms of hope. In Andrea's book, hope is a change agent. It's an action word, a place, it's practice, and it is medicine. The Story and Science of Hope is available for purchase from Groundwood Books. And now a little about my guest. Andrea Curtis writes books for kids, young adults, and grown-ups. Her work has been published all over the world. And last year she published Loop de Loop, Circular Solutions for a Waste-Free World, which was honored with a Blueberry Changemaker Award and a Stepping Stones Honor Award. She's also the author of the young adult novel Big Water, based on the true story of a pair of teenage shipwreck survivors. Welcome, Andrea.
Thanks so much, Lola. It's lovely to be here.
It's great to have you here. Well, before we get into the conversation, if you don't know, you can find Journey of the Art wherever you get your podcasts. So check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms to listen on the go, follow the show, and leave a comment. This really helps to boost our visibility so more folks like you can discover and join the community. Also, as always, I'd love to connect with you on Instagram, so please follow the show at Journey of the Art Pod. Okay, Andrea, let's get into our conversation for today. So the first thing I want to ask you is about something that you wrote on your website, which I was really fascinated by. So according to your biography, you like to dream of being in the mountains. Told you wouldn't see that one coming.
It's true.
So what does that represent? I'm just curious, what does that represent for you? Is it about being in a physical destination, or does it represent more to you like a state of mind?
That's such a nice question. Thank you for asking me that.
You're welcome.
I love the mountains. I like to be outside in nature. I like to hike. I like to ski. I think it represents both a place and a state of mind. There's a sort of spaciousness in the mountains, in my experience, a feeling of just having perspective. And so I really value the time that I can leave my home in Ontario, which is pretty flat, and explore other places, mostly mountains.
Yeah, you should come to BC. BC has lots.
Yeah, I love it.
All right, so that leads me to the book. You just talked about a state of mind, and that's what we're really talking about today. And I'd like to start with appreciation. So I want to appreciate you for writing a book that I consider to be so necessary for the times that we're in. What sparked the idea of this book?
Well, I have written a number of books in the last 5 years or so about climate change and for kids. And I did a series of 4 books with Groundwood Books, the same publisher for Hope, called the Think Cities series. And they looked at climate and cities, sustainability in cities, and of course all the challenges that cities face as a result of climate stuff. And I would go into schools and talk to young readers about these books, and I would have such interesting conversations with them. But often we would end up talking about what we think about climate change. And they'd sometimes ask me, what do you think? And, as an adult, no, you don't want to be the person who's like, oh, we're totally screwed.
Yeah.
Even if you think that, you know, I mean, no, you don't really want to be that voice. And,
Hmm.
but of course, the statistics show that nearly 60% of young people are truly worried about climate change. In fact, it affects their daily life, like sleeping and being in school and so on. So, whatever I said, they were already worried, and I found that such a harrowing experience trying to talk to kids about climate change, talk to them about their worries. And what I'd often think to myself, well, we need to be hopeful. We need to act as if we can make a difference. And then I started really thinking to myself, what does that mean? And why do I feel hopeful? What do I mean when I talk about hope? And so it sent me down this very deep rabbit hole of research into just understanding what hope is. And I was really thrilled because what I found was there's the 40 years of research from everyone from behavioral psychologists to physicians to nurses to educators, neuroscientists studying hope. And so I was completely thrilled about this and knew that I wanted to bring that back to all these kids that I was talking to in classrooms.
Hmm. It's interesting that you just talked about research because that was going to be my next question. It's that there is an enormous amount of research uh, evident in this book. And I was going to ask you what that process looked like, but I'm also leaning more toward the question of what you found to be most fascinating from all the research you did.
Well, just maybe I answer both of those questions. That both the research. I started my career as a writer, as a journalist, and I studied history in university. And research is something that I absolutely love. It's in fact it's really hard for me to stop researching just because I find it such a inspiring, stimulating kind of process. So I read everything I could get my hands on. There's a lot of scientific papers which I'm ill-equipped to read, but did my best. Interviewed people, and and had great great interviews with people about their research on hope, and then it's a matter of really distilling it because when you're writing a book for children, of course, it needs to be really clear and straightforward. I don't think it has to be less sophisticated. I really believe in kids as really smart readers, but it does need to be distilled, and so I tried to do that in this book through I'm sure you noticed there are sort of each spread of the book has a headline,
Yeah.
things like hope can change the world, hope is an action, hope has history, hope is a science, etc. And that allowed me to pack a lot of really deep research into a simpler format. I think that the most exciting piece of research to me was the fact that hope is not static and can be taught and nurtured. So, what researchers have discovered is that no, I guess I worried when I started thinking about this that maybe I experience hope because of the privilege of being who I am in the world, and that there were children who may have experienced trauma or extreme dislocation or any number of difficulties who would struggle to access hope. But what I found, in fact, is that we all have hope, and that it takes work to nurture it, and to support, especially young people, to have more hope. But it's not something that you have or you don't. It's actually something you could be supported to have more of. So I found that really exciting, because it just means that it's a iterative process. It's something that is growing, and it's possible to increase. So that was really exciting to me.
Right. And just as a reader, I think one of the things that I found most fascinating about the different spreads that you talked about earlier is hope can be nurtured. I didn't think about that. I mean, it does make sense that hope can be nurtured, but just actually stopping and pausing to recognize that hope can be like a plant that you water and you start to get some fruits out of it. That deeply fascinated me. But I want to move us to another question, and we'll probably come back to some of the things that you touched on just now. And I suspect that you've probably been asked this already, but how different is hope from faith?
It's a really interesting question. I tried to keep this book entirely secular, but of course hope is so clearly tied to faith in people's minds. Um, and my the for me, the because I was really trying to stay away from faith, um, because people's faith, there's so many ways to look at it. And I'm not sure that in a book about science it has a place. I make reference to it, and certainly in terms of the history of hope, and how people have talked about it. But my for me, the distinction that's really important is between optimism and hope, because people use those two terms interchangeably. And the people who are studying hope, and who call themselves hope theorists, which I just so love. I don't know why. It just seems like it's like this combination of this sort of thing that exists in the ether, and then theory, which is like hard science.
Yeah, so cool.
But anyway, the difference between hope and optimism, I think, is really significant. Optimism is a feeling that things are going to work out, whereas hope is about leaning into and moving toward something that's meaningful to you, despite the obstacles, knowing that there are going to be challenges. Maybe the hope will not even be realized, but doing it anyway. And I think that's really significant. And that idea that you spoke of earlier, that hope is a verb, it's an action word. I think that is the thing that is really important in the book, and certainly to me.
So one of the things that you talked about in the book is that hope is a practice. And we just touched on this earlier about that piece of it being something that you nurture. And you highlight goal setting as a means of building hope. Can you talk a little bit more about this, especially as it pertains to kids?
Well, it's very interesting, because when I first started researching hope, what I found was the first people that started talking about this were psychologists. And it was in an era when psychology was trying to show that it was a science. And so they were wanting to pair it with the kind of data driven information gathering that scientists value. And so there were all sorts of systems set up, and rubrics. This is what makes a hopeful person. There's a set of there's a like a quiz, and you fill out the quiz, and are you a person who has goals, and has pathways to reach those goals. And this idea of hope as something that you can work toward and build, create a plan, a map to reach that hope is incredibly appealing to some people, but it doesn't make any sense to other people. And so the thing that I found so interesting interviewing some of these hope theorists was that idea of a pathways focused hope, it is kind of receding. It first of all, when you think about climate change and climate disaster, we creating a path to a certain number of goals and a path to achieving those goals, it's probably not it's not going to work like that. We need to think about hope differently. And so more recently, the hope theorists have been talking a lot about how does hope look different to different people. For some people, it is about goals, but for others, the idea of a goal-focused hope just kind of misses the point. In fact, one of the researchers I spoke to said to me, "You can fail to reach a goal, but you can't fail at hope," which I think is a really beautiful way of thinking about it. And in that context, hope is nurtured not only by making a plan. It can be, but it's also nurtured by art and music and connecting with others, being in nature, being in community. And those are, they're not, it's not like a map to reaching the hope, but it's a sort of more community minded, holistic view of how one can achieve their hopes.
Mm. You also talk about incorporating hope building into our education system and our communities. What does that look like for you?
Well, I found some really interesting people talking about this, and there are educators and people who've reached out to me since the book has been published who use a kind of way of thinking about hope as a kind of overarching theme in their classrooms, and it's really quite interesting. One of the things that I found so fascinating as a kid who really didn't love the rigidity of a classroom where I'm told what to do and so on. The idea that choice is really important in a classroom where hope is allowed to proliferate. Choice is important. Teachers are talking about making walls of hope heroes. In the book, I have about 4 or 5 people at the back of the book who I see as hope heroes, people who've overcome obstacles, who've seen a problem, have worked their way toward it, and these people could be on the wall of a classroom. They talk about also talking with young people about what hope looks like, what it feels like, what it tastes like, what it sounds like. It's a really different way of thinking about, like, it's not just about a goal, it's about like how you live in the world, how you experience the world. One teacher has done something that she calls hope kits, and I think there are different ways that they do it, but it could be like a shoebox, and the kids create, they cut out pictures from magazines and or bring stuff in and put it in their box, and that's their hope kit. Another one has used the model of a bento box for sushi, and the different elements that make up each kid's individual hopes go in the bento box. Another thing that I think is really important in it, and it kind of goes back to so much of what I talk about in the book around hope growing in community, is the idea of service in classrooms. There a classroom in Edmonton where the kids were talking a lot about hope, and the teacher was using hope as this theme in the class. They discussed, again, it goes back to this choice thing too. They discussed what would in our community, what would make us feel more hopeful? And these kids decided that they needed to get rid of the graffiti on some of the buildings in a community park. And so they, brainstormed, how are we going to do this? They talked about the other people in the community that might get involved. They connected with seniors, and they cleaned up the graffiti. I think they also connected with the police in the neighborhood, and so they had this whole sort of community wide collaboration, and this was seen as a really powerful tool to foster hope in that class. So there's so many ways. I mean,
Yeah.
innovative teachers are doing this without using the language of hope, but it's a really neat toolkit and a lens, really, to see how you can foster hope in your classroom.
Yeah, I love all of that. It sounds very not just cool but also powerful.
Yeah.
And with all the bad news that we hear, I think it's so important to empower children to nurture hope. So thank you for sharing that. Another thing that I appreciate is the fact that you acknowledge that not all children come from or are in ideal situations to nurture hope. And you touched on this a little bit earlier. And you talk about children who have flourished despite harsh realities. In the book, you talk about them having strong reserves of hope. Can you share a bit more about this?
Well, one of the things that these hope theorists and researchers have studied is, um, as you say, kids living in poverty, refugee children who have come from really difficult circumstances and have been dislocated, left family, maybe fleeing war, trauma. And I mean, this is really, really exciting to me that they can, when given the opportunity, express these deep wells of hope and hopefulness. And by supporting them to talk about it, one of the things I say in the book is hope plus hope equals more hope. And so just talking about it, having a chance to express what fills them with hopeful feelings can nurture more hope. Um, and yeah, so the research is really clear that that despite all of these challenges, um, it is possible for these kids to emerge with hope and all of the myriad benefits. We haven't really talked about that, but I mean the hope researchers are showing that hopeful people are happier, they're
Mm,
healthier, they live longer, they have stronger friendships, they are more creative thinkers, problem solvers, less depression. I mean, like
yeah,
everybody wants to be more hopeful with those kinds of benefits.
right. So this is my last question about the book. You talk about hope being an action, and I think that's one of the things that stand out to me. Apart from it being something that you nurture and hope being medicine, um, but at the end of the book, you share stories of people taking action to save the environment. And you touched on this earlier, and I love that you included this hope-inspired action. How easy was it for you to find these stories?
Honestly, it's sort of it was hard to limit the number of people that I included, and I was trying to get a range of people from around the world doing different things. So, I mean, the this is something that I've discovered, is that the stories are out there, and sometimes it does take some digging. I wrote a piece when the book came out for the Globe and Mail, called "What We Talk About When We Talk About Hope," and I was uh, writing about how, my own hope ebbs and flows like everybody's does.
Right.
Nobody can feel hopeful all the time. And this is, we have to allow that to exist. That's just real. But one of the things that I have found really works for me, in addition to being in nature, like we talked about, those mountains are pretty important. And for me, art and music and theater and dance, that really nurtures my own hope. But also looking for and seeking out stories, positive stories. I think I wrote about this in the newspaper, saying, sometimes this can seem like an abnegation of responsibility, that somehow looking for those positive stories is somehow looking away from the horrors of the world, and that this is
Mm,
like the act of a callous citizen or something. But I think that actually shoring up our hope is essential to being a good citizen, to engaging in the world, without looking for those great stories like the ones that I talk about in the book, and the ones that I see when I seek them out. I think we can feel a lot of despair, and that leads to inaction and stasis. And in fact, I think that it kind of behooves us to nurture our own hope with these positive stories as well.
right. I love that action of seeking out hopeful stories. I think it's something that we need to do much more of, especially
Yeah.
since we're constantly being bombarded with bad stories, sad stories.
That's right. And it doesn't mean that it's not like some sort of rose-colored glasses. I mean, the terrible things exist as well, but there are people fighting for change. There are people doing really interesting things. There are people connecting with their neighbors. There are people cleaning up their parks and,
Right.
looking after elderly people. That this exists too.
Yeah. So we're moving on to the what I call the writing tips section of our conversation. And I have to say that when I first heard of this book, the reason I was fascinated by it is the fact that this is an abstract subject, but what you've done is you've brought a creative perspective and an analytic perspective, and you've brought them together to tell the story and the science of hope. So it doesn't feel far away. It feels very tangible because you've backed it up with research. You've shown us the importance of looking at nature and beauty and having those interpersonal connections. How do you write about big abstract topics like this and break it down? I know you've touched on this earlier on, but I'm wondering if you can share a bit more about how you break down these complex topics for young readers.
Well, I think one of the things for me is that I have to do a lot of research in order to know it as well as I possibly can. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm not a scientist, so a lot of the papers that I'm reading are really hard for me. I have to spend a lot of time thinking about them, trying to understand them, interviewing people. So I basically just research until I feel like I understand it well enough that I can explain it to a young person.
Mhm.
And as I mentioned earlier, I think kids are really smart. So it's not like I'm dumbing it down for young readers. I have a huge amount of respect for young people, their creativity and intelligence. It's just I want to be able to explain it in a simple enough way that anybody could follow it. So that's where I start, is the research, and then it's a matter of the framework. As I mentioned earlier, the this book is set up so that there are sort of almost like chapters, but it's just a spread, and so I knew I wanted to organize it in that way, and then it starts to, it starts to come together when I have both the research and the conceptual framework,
Mhm.
and it's then kind of cutting it back so that it's a manageable length for young people.
Right. That's the other thing that I wanted to ask about because you've talked about twice now about the importance of not dumbing it down, but being as straightforward as possible. So, are there any extra steps that you need to take in the writing process to make sure that you are meeting your readers where they need to be met? Do you have to go over your work and or give it to someone and say, "Do you think this is too complex?" What does that look like?
I haven't had to do that. I mean, I'm thinking about the reader all the time, and I'm using that lens all the time. But as I have said, I really have a huge amount of respect for kids, and I don't think that I have to. I think that they can accept complicated ideas, and
Mm,
in fact, I think kids accept, say that two things can be true at the same time in a way that adults struggle with.
right,
You know,
right,
hope can be really important, and it can also be hard. That's that makes sense to
right.
kids. So yeah, I wouldn't say that I do. I think I'm when I know I'm writing something for children, I'm using that part of my brain. But one of the things that a lot of people have told me about this book, that this is a book that adults need to read as well, and um, I would love to see it in another format. I think it could be almost the same, but maybe in a different format that adults might pick up more readily.
Right, right. I totally agree with that because I learned a lot, and
Right.
it's the kind of book that you read over and over again because there's several layers of research and meaning that you need to sit and really think about. What does that mean? What does that mean for me? Right? How do I nurture hope? How is it an action word for me? How can hope be medicine for me now? These are the
Yes.
big questions. So that's one of the things I love about the book is that it causes you to ask big questions and it gives you room to sit and start to unravel those questions to find the answer.
I really look forward to kids talking about it in class with their teachers too.
Yeah,
Like, think that it's intended to open up those questions, and not answer them all,
yeah,
but hopefully kids will be able to answer them as well.
yeah. I do plan to have my kids read it, and I want to hear their thoughts on it. I think it'll make for a great conversation starter. All right, so we've come to the end of our time here, but I do like to ask my guests, what is the secret to staying on the journey of your art?
Oh, if I knew, I would put it in a bottle and sell it on Etsy. No, I'm joking. No, I mean, I think for me, um, it actually, I think that it's very similar to what nurtures hope, honestly, because I think that creativity is an act of leaning into uncertainty. We
Mm,
don't know, we have an idea, we try to express it, we don't know if it will be how well it will be received, we don't know if it will be, in the case of writers, published, if people will buy it. So I think that it's very similar to hope. And so the things that nurture my hope are sort of the same things that nurture my creativity. And that's, for me, is like immersing myself in writing, amazing, like
right.
great writing. I read constantly. I'm sure you do as well. And I love to go to the theater. I like to see how other artists work, how they approach storytelling. Um, I love to see dance. I just feel like that other people's art really, really nurtures my own creativity. And when I'm feeling kind of uninspired, that's where I go. I read poetry. I go see live art. Um, and yeah, I think that for me, that's the secret sauce, is just like going to those places that nurture my hope, the art
Mm,
being outside.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much, Andrea. I've had a marvelous time having this deeply insightful conversation with you. And thank you for writing this very needed book.
Thank you so much, Lola. I appreciate you having me.
You're very welcome. And thank you for listening or watching us today. If you'd like to get the story and Signs of Hope, you can get the book through the links in the description if you're watching, or in the show notes if you're listening to us. Until next time, I'll see you. On the next episode, I'll be chatting with another inspiring artist. But before then, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me what you think about this show and this episode. Feel free to drop me a note here or send me a DM on Instagram at Journey of the Art Blood. Finally, please subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, or follow and rate the show if you're listening elsewhere. Help me connect with other artists who need a dose of inspiration today. Until next time, stay on the journey of your art.